The Fall and the Fire. Emma Rodriguez stood outside the tall glass tower of Hawthorne Technologies, the same building that once felt like the crown jewel of her career, and for the first time since she joined the company, she felt like an outsider. The September wind whipped her hair loose from its neat bun as she clutched the strap of her worn leather bag, her fingers trembling despite her best effort to appear composed. People streamed past her on the busy Manhattan street, some in sharp business suits, others carrying coffee cups and messenger bags, all of them focused on their own destinations, completely unaware that for Emma, the world had just tilted beneath her feet. Only an hour earlier, she had stood in that glossy conference room filled with executives and board members, her presentation laid out with the precision of months of research, her voice steady as she explained the brilliance of Project Genesis, the campaign she believed could change the face of modern marketing. She had answered every question with data, every doubt with proof, and for a moment she thought she had won them over, until Sebastian Hawthorne, in his perfectly tailored suit and unreadable green eyes, had cut her down in front of everyone. His words still echoed in her ears like sharp glass. Overly ambitious, unrealistic, not aligned with the company's vision. He hadn't just rejected her idea, he had dismantled her credibility. And then, with the cool detachment of a man used to crushing people without flinching, he told her she was done, fired, just like that. No private conversation, no warning, just humiliation delivered in front of the very people who once respected her. She remembered the silence in the room, the way Thomas had looked at her with shock, the way Julia had tried to rise in protest but froze under Sebastian's glare. Emma had managed to gather her things, walk out with her head high, and even press the elevator button without crying. But now, standing outside with the noise of the city swirling around her, the reality pressed down hard. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking through her daze. She pulled it out and saw Julia's name flashing on the screen. For a moment Emma debated ignoring it, but she answered, her voice thin. "Hey." Julia's voice was sharp with outrage. "Emma, I can't believe what he just did. That was completely out of line. Everyone knows it." Emma exhaled, a bitter laugh slipping out. Everyone knows it, but no one said a word. Not really. They all just sat there and let him do it. Julia sighed, her tone softer now. "You didn't deserve that. Your project was brilliant. I'll come over tonight, okay? We'll talk this through." Emma thanked her friend but didn't confirm. Right now she didn't want pity, even from Julia. She needed space to breathe, to process. She took the subway back to Queens, the same ride she had taken every morning for years. But this time it felt different. The bright advertisements along, the train walls, the chatter of commuters, the screech of the tracks. It all felt muted, like she was moving through a world that no longer fit. When she reached her stop and climbed the familiar stairs, the smell of street food from a vendor hit her, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline and city grime. It was a scent that had been her childhood, one she used to associate with struggle and resilience. Today, it reminded her of failure. Her mother was waiting at the apartment, the woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's education and dreams. Maria Rodriguez was petite but strong, her hands roughened from years of cleaning offices at night. Her eyes lined not just with age but with the weight of endless sacrifice. She opened the door before Emma could even knock, as if sensing something was wrong. "Mia, what happened? You look pale." Emma tried to force a smile, but her voice cracked. "I lost my job, Mama." She sank onto the worn sofa as the words spilled out. Sebastian's cold dismissal, the humiliation in the conference room, the way everything she had worked for had crumbled in one morning. Maria listened in silence, her expression steady, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. When Emma finally finished, her mother spoke in the calm, resolute tone that had carried Emma through childhood. "Then you build again, Emma. You don't let one man decide your worth. You have fought too hard to stop now." Those words lit a spark in Emma, a faint ember buried under the ashes of her humiliation. She wanted to believe her mother, but the weight of what happened felt crushing. She had given her life to Hawthorne Technologies. Long nights, weekends spent working, missed family gatherings, all sacrificed because she believed her work mattered. and in a single moment Sebastian had tossed it aside like nothing. Yet as she lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, Maria's words echoed in her mind. Build again. The next few days were a blur of emotions: anger, grief, determination. Julia visited with takeout containers and pep talks, reminding Emma of her talent and worth. Thomas Mitchell called her once, apologizing for not speaking up in the meeting. "You were right, Emma," he said quietly. "But Sebastian has the final word, and sometimes he doesn't see what's in front of him until it's too late." Emma appreciated his words, but they didn't change her reality. She was unemployed, her reputation in question, and her dream project abandoned. Yet somewhere in that mess she found clarity. If Hawthorne Technologies didn't want her vision, she would build it herself. It started small, almost laughably so. Emma cleared the cluttered desk in her bedroom and set up her old laptop. She sketched out business models on yellow notepads, listed potential clients, and mapped out what resources she would need. She had no investors, no office, not even a name for her company, but she had an idea she believed in, and that was something. Julia, true to her friendship, showed up one evening with a resignation letter already typed. "If you're doing this, I'm with you," she declared, her dark eyes gleaming with loyalty. Emma protested at first, but Julia waved her off. "I'd rather build something real with you than rot under Sebastian's arrogance." They found a tiny co-working space downtown, a single room with flickering lights and a cracked window that let in the noise of car horns from the street below. It wasn't much, but to Emma it felt like possibility. She named her venture Nova Path, a symbol of new beginnings and uncharted directions. The first weeks were brutal: long hours, endless cold emails to potential clients, rejection after rejection. Money ran low, and Emma found herself eating instant noodles again, the same cheap meals she had survived on during college. But unlike back then, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for something that was hers. Late one night, as she sat with Julia surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered notes, Emma felt a fire rising inside her. "We're going to make this work," she said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Julia grinned, raising her cup in a mock toast. "To Nova Path." Emma clinked her own cup against hers. The fire was small, flickering, but it was there. Sebastian Hawthorne might have taken her job, but he hadn't taken her vision. And in that moment, Emma vowed that one day he would see what he had thrown away. Building from the ashes. The first weeks inside the tiny co-working space were not glamorous, and Emma Rodriguez knew it. The cracked plaster on the walls, the buzzing fluorescent light overhead, and the thin carpet with coffee stains told a story, very different from the polished glass offices of Hawthorne Technologies. But for Emma and Julia, those four walls carried something more valuable than prestige. They carried freedom. It was freedom to work on an idea without someone dismissing it as too ambitious. Freedom to pour every ounce of creativity into a vision without fearing it would be stolen. And freedom to know that every success and failure would be their own. Emma set up her laptop on the wobbly desk by the window. Julia organized files and set up a makeshift whiteboard, and together they began to map out how NovaPath could exist in a world dominated by giants like Hawthorne. At first, the days, were fueled more by sheer determination than by actual progress. Emma spent hours rewriting her pitch deck, stripping away the corporate language she had once used and focusing instead on clarity and passion. Julia scoured databases for potential small business clients, companies too overlooked by larger marketing firms to matter, but companies who could benefit from exactly what Emma envisioned. Most of the emails they sent went unanswered. Some replies came short and dismissive, "Not interested," or "We don't have the budget." Yet a handful of responses showed curiosity, and those became lifelines. Emma scheduled calls with anyone who was willing to listen, often speaking late into the night, her voice hoarse but her energy unbroken. The money situation, however, quickly became critical. Emma had a small amount of savings, barely enough to cover rent and food for a few months, and Julia had dipped into her own emergency fund. They lived simply, Coffee brewed from the cheapest beans, lunches made from dollar store groceries, nights filled with noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Yet despite the exhaustion, Emma felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Every morning when she unlocked the door to that shabby office, she felt ownership. No one could fire her here. No one could dismiss her without hearing her out. One afternoon, after a week of relentless rejections, Emma and Julia sat in silence over their laptops. The air was heavy with fatigue, the kind that seeps into the bones. Julia leaned back, rubbing her eyes. "Emma, we can't keep hitting walls forever. Maybe we need to scale down, take freelance gigs, something to keep the lights on." Emma nodded slowly, staring at the spreadsheet filled with red numbers. She knew Julia was right. Passion alone wouldn't pay rent. But just as despair began to creep in, Emma's email chimed with a new message. The subject line read, "Interested in learning more about Project Genesis." Her pulse quickened as she opened it. A small but growing e-commerce brand had stumbled upon Emma's old research paper posted online, and they were intrigued by the personalization concept. They wanted to meet. Emma's hands shook as she forwarded the email to Julia. This is our chance." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Emma revised her presentation until it was polished to perfection. Julia worked on potential case studies, and together they rehearsed every answer to every possible objection. The meeting took place in a modest office uptown. Nothing like the boardrooms Emma had grown used to, but the energy was different. The owner, a young entrepreneur named Marcus, listened intently as Emma explained how NovaPath could help his company connect with customers on a deeper level. Instead of brushing off her ideas, he leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with every slide. When Emma finished, he sat back with a grin. "This is exactly what we've been missing. Let's try it." It wasn't a massive deal, not a multi-million-dollar contract, but it was validation. Their first client. From that point, NovaPath began to crawl forward. Marcus's company became a testbed, and the results were immediate. Higher engagement, repeat customers, glowing feedback. Marcus told his colleagues, and soon Emma found herself fielding calls from other small businesses eager to learn more. With every success, NovaPath's reputation grew. Slowly, Emma and Julia expanded their team, bringing on 2 interns willing to work for little more than experience and the promise of being part of something groundbreaking. But with growth came attention, and that attention reached the ears of Sebastian Hawthorne. At first, he ignored the whispers. What could one disgraced former employee possibly accomplish? But then quarterly reports at Hawthorne Technologies began to slip. Clients who once renewed contracts without hesitation started asking for alternatives. Market analysts wrote small pieces about a promising newcomer named NovaPath, and Sebastian found himself reading Emma's name again and again. It infuriated him. He remembered the day he had fired her, how she had walked out of the conference room without a word of protest, her back straight despite the humiliation. He had thought she was finished. Now he realized she was rising in ways he hadn't anticipated. For Emma, however, Sebastian's thoughts no longer mattered. She was too busy to dwell on him. NovaPath's office grew from one cramped room to a small suite with real desks and functioning lights. The interns became full-time staff, Julia managed operations, and Emma threw herself into every client pitch as though her life depended on it. Some nights, she collapsed onto the office couch, too tired to commute home. But even in exhaustion, she felt victorious. The girl from Queens, the woman fired in disgrace, was building something no one could take from her. Yet beneath the victories lay a quiet fear, the fear of failure. Every contract mattered. Every invoice was survival. Emma often stayed awake, into the early hours, staring at her laptop as numbers blurred on the screen. But each time doubt crept in, she remembered her mother's words. Build again. And she did, brick by brick, contract by contract. NovaPath was still small, still fragile, but it was alive, and in its heartbeat, Emma found her own. One evening, as Emma stood by the office window watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, Julia joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Do you realize what we've done?" Julia asked, softly. Emma smiled, her reflection faint in the glass. "We've just started." And in her chest, the fire that had sparked the night she was fired now burned brighter than ever. The turning tide, by the time autumn painted Manhattan in shades of rust and gold, Novapath was no longer just a daring idea born out of humiliation. It had become a force to be reckoned with. What began as a desperate gamble in a cracked wall office had turned into a steadily growing company, its client list expanding each week, its reputation spreading beyond the small businesses that first gave Emma Rodriguez a chance. She could hardly believe it herself when a mid-tier fashion retailer, known for its stubborn reliance on outdated strategies, reached out and asked Novapath to handle their holiday campaign. The deal was the biggest they had ever signed, and when the numbers came back, sales up by 60%, online engagement doubled, and brand loyalty surveys glowing with praise, the story caught the attention of industry blogs. Headlines appeared. The fired executive who built a rising star. From dismissal to disruption, the Emma Rodriguez story. Emma didn't let herself revel in it too much. She had learned early on that victories were fragile, and the moment you got comfortable, the world had a way of knocking you down. Still, late at night when the office emptied and she finally leaned back in her chair, she allowed herself a quiet smile. Each article, each piece of recognition wasn't just about success, it was proof that she hadn't been wrong. Project Genesis wasn't too ambitious. It wasn't a fantasy. It was exactly what the world needed, and she had been brave, enough to carry it forward even after being cast out. Meanwhile, Hawthorne Technologies was stumbling. For years it had sat at the top of its field, shielded by its legacy, but legacy could not outpace innovation. Sebastian Hawthorne began to notice cracks in the empire. Reports crossed his desk showing declining client renewals, growing skepticism from analysts, and whispers of discontent among employees. The most stinging blow came when a longtime partner declined to renew their contract, citing their interest in exploring new solutions offered by younger, more agile firms. Though the report didn't name Novapath directly, Sebastian knew. He had been hearing Emma's name too often to ignore it. She had become the specter haunting every meeting, the cautionary tale of what his arrogance had unleashed. For Emma, life was too full to dwell on Sebastian. Novapath's team had grown to 10, and the office buzzed with energy each morning. Julia thrived in her role as operations manager. The interns from the early days had blossomed into confident professionals, and Emma found herself not just leading projects but mentoring her team the way Thomas Mitchell once mentored her. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she was creating the kind of workplace she had always wished Hawthorne had been. Collaborative, encouraging, driven not by ego but by shared vision. Every time she walked through the office and saw her team's passion, she felt a swell of pride deeper than any title could ever give her. The turning tide. By the time autumn painted Manhattan in shades of rust and gold, Novapath was no longer just a daring idea born out of humiliation. It had become a force to be reckoned with. What began as a desperate gamble in a cracked wall office had turned into a steadily growing company, its client list expanding each week, its reputation spreading beyond the small businesses that first gave Emma Rodriguez a chance. She could hardly believe it herself when a mid-tier fashion retailer, known for its stubborn reliance on outdated strategies, reached out and asked Novapath to handle their holiday campaign. The deal was the biggest they had ever signed, and when the numbers came back, sales up by 60%, online engagement doubled, and brand loyalty surveys glowing with praise, the story caught the attention of industry blogs. Headlines appeared. The fired executive who built a rising star. From dismissal to disruption, the Emma Rodriguez story. Emma didn't let herself revel in it too much. She had learned early on that victories were fragile, and the moment you got comfortable, the world had a way of knocking you down. Still, late at night when the office emptied and she finally leaned back in her chair, she allowed herself a quiet smile. Each article, each piece of recognition wasn't just about success, it was proof that she hadn't been wrong. Project Genesis wasn't too ambitious. It wasn't a fantasy. It was exactly what the world needed, and she had been brave, enough to carry it forward even after being cast out. Meanwhile, Hawthorne Technologies was stumbling. For years it had sat at the top of its field, shielded by its legacy. But legacy could not outpace innovation. Sebastian Hawthorne began to notice cracks in the empire. Reports crossed his desk, showing declining client renewals, growing skepticism from analysts, and whispers of discontent among employees. The most stinging blow came when a longtime partner declined to renew their contract, citing their interest in exploring new solutions offered by younger, more agile firms. Though the report didn't name NovaPath directly, Sebastian knew. He had been hearing Emma's name too often to ignore it. She had become the specter haunting every meeting, the cautionary tale of what his arrogance had unleashed. For Emma, life was too full to dwell on Sebastian. NovaPath's team had grown to 10, and the office buzzed with energy each morning. Julia thrived in her role as operations manager. The interns from the early days had blossomed into confident professionals, and Emma found herself not just leading projects but mentoring her team the way Thomas Mitchell once mentored her. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she was creating the kind of workplace she had always wished Hawthorne had been. Collaborative, encouraging, driven not by ego but by shared vision. Every time she walked through the office and saw her team's passion, she felt a swell of pride deeper than any title could ever give her. The defining moment of NovaPath's rise came when Emma was invited to speak at the Global Marketing Innovators Conference, an event dominated by industry titans and attended by thousands of executives, investors, and journalists. For weeks leading up to it, Emma poured herself into her keynote, determined to show not only NovaPath's achievements but also the future of marketing as she envisioned it. Julia teased her about her perfectionism, but Emma couldn't afford anything less than extraordinary. This wasn't just about sharing ideas. This was her chance to stand on the stage where Sebastian once reigned and prove that she belonged there, maybe even more than he ever had. The night before the conference, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, going over her slides one last time. Her mother brewed tea and set it beside her. "Mija," Maria said gently, "you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You've already shown the world who you are." Emma reached for her mother's hand, smiling softly. "I know, Mama. But tomorrow isn't about proving. It's about showing every person who was told they were too ambitious, too small, too different, that they can rise anyway." Maria's eyes glistened with pride. "Then you will shine." The conference hall was a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the hum of conversation, the flash of cameras, and the shuffle of designer shoes across marble floors. Emma stood backstage, adjusting the microphone clipped to her blazer, her heart pounding in her chest. When the announcer called her name, she stepped onto the stage to a wave of applause. Thousands of faces stared back at her, but instead of fear, she felt fire. She began to speak, her voice steady, her words painting a vision of a world where technology didn't just sell but connected, where businesses didn't just target but understood, where every customer felt seen. She walked the stage with ease, her slides glowing behind her, each one a testament to months of victories born from ashes. When she finished, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. Among the audience sat Sebastian Hawthorne. He had not planned to attend. His pride resisted the thought, but curiosity had drawn him there, and as he listened, his jaw tightened. He couldn't deny the brilliance in her words, nor could he ignore the standing ovation that followed. For the first time, he realized the depth of his mistake. By firing Emma, he hadn't just rid himself of an employee. He had unleashed a rival more dangerous than any competitor, because she was driven by the fire he himself had ignited. After her keynote, Emma was swarmed by journalists and executives eager to meet her. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded near, and investors handed her business cards with eager smiles. She navigated it gracefully, her years of corporate training blending with her natural poise. Yet amidst the noise, she felt a calm center. This was the moment she had dreamed of, Not for revenge, not for validation, but for fulfillment. Later that evening, as she stood at the balcony of the conference hall looking out at the glittering city skyline, Julia joined her. You realize what just happened, right? You didn't just attend the conference, you owned it. Emma chuckled softly. It feels surreal. Julia nudged her shoulder. Sebastian was there, I saw him. Emma's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly steadied herself. Let him watch. The story isn't about him anymore. Yet, for Sebastian, the story was about nothing else. Back in his penthouse office, he stared at the city lights and replayed Emma's speech in his mind. He had thought himself untouchable, the heir to an empire too strong to crumble. But now, with each client lost to Novapath, each headline celebrating Emma's brilliance, he realized that the tide had turned. And the worst part was knowing that the person dismantling his empire was the same woman he had dismissed as unworthy, in front of his own board. For Emma, the tide wasn't just turning in the industry, it was turning in her own heart. She no longer felt the sting of Sebastian's words, no longer carried the weight of humiliation. Instead, she felt the thrill of possibility, the joy of building something with her own hands, the satisfaction of seeing her mother's sacrifices bear fruit. Novapath was no longer fragile. It was strong, steady, and unstoppable. And as Emma stood on that balcony, the cool night air brushing her face, she knew the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The Walkaway, the real lost winter, settled over New York like a heavy blanket, the streets dusted with snow, the air crisp with the promise of endings and beginnings. For Emma Rodriguez, the season mirrored the transformation in her life. Just a year ago, she had walked out of Hawthorne Technologies in humiliation, stripped of her title, her dignity crushed by Sebastian Hawthorne's cold dismissal. Now she entered each morning into Novapath's new headquarters, a sleek but warm office in Midtown Manhattan filled with plants, laughter, and the energy of a team that believed in what they were building. The once cracked walls and buzzing lights of her first office were gone, replaced with polished wood floors, a wall of glass overlooking the city skyline, and a sense of permanence she had only dared to dream of. Clients arrived daily, sometimes in suits and ties, sometimes in streetwear, but all of them left impressed, carrying with them the certainty that Novapath wasn't just another startup, it was the future. The company had doubled in size again, its revenue climbing faster than Emma could have predicted. But what gave her the deepest satisfaction wasn't the numbers or the accolades. It was walking through the office and hearing her team brainstorm with enthusiasm, seeing their eyes light up when solutions emerged, and knowing that she had created an environment where no one's voice would be silenced the way hers once had been. The media had fully embraced her story. She was profiled in business magazines, invited on panels, even interviewed on television shows where the hosts introduced her as the visionary who turned rejection into revolution. The nickname stuck, and though Emma sometimes cringed at its drama, she couldn't deny that it captured the truth. Her rejection had indeed sparked a revolution, not only in her career, but in an industry that now rushed to adapt to the ideas she had championed. And while she rose, Hawthorne Technologies faltered. Reports of internal conflict leaked to the press. Board members clashed with Sebastian, and longtime employees quietly slipped away to competitors, some even joining Novapath. Each quarter brought disappointing numbers, and each investor call became more strained. The empire that once seemed untouchable was slowly unraveling, thread by thread. In the lobby, Sebastian was waiting. The years had not been kind to him. His once impeccable suit looked slightly rumpled, his confident posture tempered by the weariness of someone carrying too many defeats. His green eyes still held their sharpness, but there was something else there now, a vulnerability Emma had never seen. When he saw her, he straightened, masking his fatigue with the remnants of his old pride. "Emma," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." They walked to a quiet cafe across the street, the hum of the city muffled by the snowfall outside. For a while, silence stretched between them, broken only by the clink of cups. Finally, Sebastian spoke. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy. "I was blind to what you created, blind to what you could have done for Hawthorne Technologies. I let my pride dismiss you, and now I see the cost, not just to the company, but to me." Emma listened, her expression calm, her heart steady. Once those words might have shaken her, might have reopened old wounds, but now they felt distant, like echoes from another lifetime. "Sebastian," she said evenly, "I don't need your apology. Not because it doesn't matter, but because I built my life without it. Novapath exists because you fired me. In trying to silence me, you gave me the freedom to prove myself." Sebastian leaned forward, desperation flickering across his face. "Maybe we can still work together. Merge our companies. Bring your vision back under the Hawthorne name. We could—" Emma raised a hand, stopping him. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "No, I will not step back into the shadow of what I escaped. I built Novapath to stand on its own, and it will. I don't need to return to Hawthorne, and I don't need your empire to validate mine. What I needed I already found, the courage to believe in myself." For a moment silence lingered. Sebastian sat back, the realization settling into his bones. He had thought she might seek revenge or validation, or perhaps the satisfaction of reclaiming what he once denied her. But she needed none of those things. She was beyond him now. When they stood to leave, Emma extended her hand. He shook it, his grip firm but reluctant, as though he was holding on to something already lost. "Goodbye, Sebastian," she said gently, and with that, she walked out into the snowy night, her head high, her steps steady. Sebastian watched her go, the cafe lights reflecting against the glass. In that moment, he understood the true cost of his arrogance. He had not just lost a brilliant employee. He had lost the future she carried, the vision that could have saved his company, and the chance to stand beside someone extraordinary. Watching her disappear into the snowfall, he knew with aching certainty that in firing her, he had fired his own destiny. For Emma, the night felt like closure. She returned to Novapath's office where her team was still gathered, laughing over pizza boxes, planning the next campaign. She joined them, her heart light. She no longer carried the weight of proving herself to Sebastian, or to anyone. She had built her own world and she belonged in it fully. As the snow fell softly outside, Emma realized something profound. Success wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about freedom. Freedom to create, to lead, to rise on her own terms. And as she looked around at her team, at the family she had chosen, she knew she hadn't just walked away from Sebastian's empire. She had walked into her own. And for the first time, she felt not just victorious, but complete.